Hello! Today we're going to be comparing a new asymmetrical horror game called Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed to the market leader of the genre, Dead by Daylight. We did a similar comparison in the past between Video Horror Society, Evil Dead the Game, and Dead by Daylight. Today we'll use a similar system comparing 6 categories of design, these being balance, comparing how fair each game feels, graphics, discussing graphical style and colour theory, level design, which will relate to the world building and how the environment supports the gameplay, user interfaces, focusing on user experience and informational architecture, matchmaking and communication, looking at matchmaking and the player base itself, and finally, how fun are they to play. The prior comparison video was attempting to suggest which games had the strongest design in various categories. This video instead is trying to establish how does Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed compare to DBD, and does it appeal to the same audience? I have loved asymmetrical horror games for a long time, having played most of them at this point. Dead by Daylight is my main game on Twitch and here on YouTube, and it stands tall as the dominant game in the genre, but in recent years many other games have entered the arena and still more loom on the horizon. But one of those potential competitors is finally here, Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. Now I'm a big Ghostbusters fan as well, as many of us probably are, and I have hoped for a more casual asym horror game since Dead by Daylight leans ever closer to being a competitive one. But before we can compare their specific designs, let's take a rundown through their core gameplay. I've obviously detailed Dead by Daylight a lot in the past, but to summarise, 4 survivors seek to repair 5 of the 7 generators to power the exit gates, avoiding and evading one powerful killer. This killer seeks to achieve the opposite, prevent the generators being completed, hooking and killing the survivors, and preventing escape. The win states are to escape through the exit door or hatch as survivor, or kill as many survivors as possible for the killer, 3 to 4 kills often being considered a victory. Each round features random generation of the maps themselves. The generators, totem spawns, and the tiles that populate the realms. These tiles are where the main focus of the game takes place. Killers chase survivors around various loops hoping to injure and ultimately down them so they can be picked up and hooked. With enough hook states, they can successfully kill one of the survivors. All of these random factors and the now 29 killer strong roster and 100 killer specific perks, you never really know what to expect as a survivor. Likewise, there are 113 survivor perks which the killer will have to figure out whilst mapping their environment, meaning every round of DBD feels unique and you never know what is going to happen. Moving on to Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed, similarly to Dead by Daylight, it's a 4v1, but the 4 busters are the aggressors and seek to hunt down the singular ghost player. The solo ghost player must evade, run, and hide. They can also attempt to protect their rifts, which work as respawn points if they are trapped early enough. The ghost has 3 of these, so in essence 4 lives in total. Busters have various equipment to help them, such as their PKE meter, which can help them detect the ghost's energy, finding either the rifts themselves or the ghost. They hope to coordinate and surround their prey before utilising their proton packs and traps to ultimately confine the ghost. They can also calm civilians and collect fungus during a round. It always feels like you have something to do. The ghost, however, has a very different goal. They seek to fully haunt their environment before they run out of rifts and get trapped. To do this, they can haunt individual objects, scare civilians, or even knock down the busters with their slime. Basically, they have the ability to fight back, though this can be quite risky. To evade, they are able to boost away and fly using their energy, or they can disguise themselves as an object to hide. If they can fully haunt the building, an endgame collapse-like scenario engages, where busters have one final chance to catch the ghost, though there is a time limit for this and less time is given depending on how many rifts remain. The ghost can also continue to scare civilians to further take away precious seconds. DBD and Ghostbusters feature plenty of cosmetic alteration, and Ghostbusters even lets you create your own buster altogether. Ghosts have variations which have different unique abilities which might better suit your playstyles, and busters can alter their gear, making them more effective in certain ways of ghost pursuit. There is also a small narrative element to the game as well, a storyline, which I found to be quite charming, although it also could feel a little intrusive at times, and I just wanted to play the actual game. So that's a general rundown of the gameplay itself, but how do they compare in terms of balance? Balance is a constant topic of discussion in any asymmetrical game. By their very nature, they are incredibly difficult to balance. The biggest controversy of asymmetric game is whether it can achieve the fairness of the opposing sides under the initial unbalanced setting conditions. 2 sides have varying team sizes, opposing objectives, and counteracting abilities, making balance a constant challenge. Dead by Daylight is a game which lacks much symmetry in much of its design. Vaults and pallet spawns are randomized on already randomized map tiles, making player loops unpredictable. The objective generators are also spawned in varying spots, making it sometimes easier or more difficult for each side to complete or defend. This also applies to the initial spawn locations. Killers can sometimes find themselves starting off very close to survivors, quickly entering that initial chase, or start out in the middle of the map and not knowing which direction to go before generators start popping. So long as no map offering is brought, the map itself is randomized, which again, some maps favour killers and some favour survivors. What I am saying here is the game is heavily RNG based, which only further disrupts the goal of balance. Survivors are unknowing of what killer they will be facing up against, and the killer doesn't know what survivor perk builds they're going to be either. If we compare this to a traditionally competitive game like Overwatch or League of Legends, generally you know what to expect. You pick your characters and counterpick accordingly. You try to balance around your opponent's choices. Level designs are symmetrical, ensuring both sides have the same chance of success. Asymmetrical games in their very nature are not great for fair competitive gameplay, but games like DBD lean heavily into the uncertainty factor, which I think adds to the game's atmosphere, making it fun and unique each time you play it. So as a casual fun game, it's great, but those who are looking for a serious competitive gaming experience may be left feeling frustrated.
Seen some disgusting crud in my time, but you take the cake. You're just...
This is what you do with your spare time.
So let's compare this to Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. Again, two sides with varying numbers of players, opposing objectives, and each side's abilities counteract one another, making balance difficult to attain. Instead of generators, the game features rifts, which act as a sort of life system for the ghost. These randomly spawn around the environment, hidden inside objects, sometimes giving the ghost player a small advantage, or being easily located and giving the busters the earlier upper hand. This can feel a little unfair at times, but a ghost player is never really out. Often you can use the time the busters are attacking your rifts to either haunt more challenging rooms, or plan a risky attack as you attempt to slime the busters to the ground before relocating your rift. There are some decent options for the ghost player. Player spawning seems quite consistent though. Busters always start at the main entrance of a level, guaranteeing the ghost that information, and the ghost player spawns a distance away, giving them time to choose where to hide, etc. Environments, much like in DBD, have good variety. Some levels like the larger, more open aquarium might lean more to the ghost side, and likewise, some more contained and tight locations like the prison might benefit the busters more. The ghost does not know what equipment the buster will be bringing in, and likewise the buster doesn't know exactly what kind of ghost they'll be facing. Busters can however change their secondary equipment mid-game at the cart to adjust their playstyle based on what kind of ghost they are facing. It would be nice if, likewise, the ghost player could change ghosts in between matches. As it stands, if you remain with the same players for multiple matches, that element of surprise of not knowing the ghost quickly fades. A paper on the topic of uncertainty on learning in game-like environments suggested, uncertain events can help motivate individuals, and enact the release of dopamine, which is associated with reward-seeking behaviour. It would be nice to encourage this feeling as much as possible. Unlike in DBD, there appears to be no matchmaking rating system in Ghostbusters, so I myself have sometimes been matched up with low-level players, which sometimes feels a little unfair, but with the ability to learn the basics against AI so easily in Ghostbusters, I don't see this as much of an issue, especially if it continues to focus on the casual playstyle. I have only played on mouse and keyboard as well, but I have heard from some that playing on controller makes some of the escaping mechanics easier for Ghost. If that is the case, I would like to see a healthier middle ground for that, but balance-wise, I would say it's pretty good. Similar to Dead by Daylight, but with less randomised factors, which keeps the game accessible and simple. Although there is some variety, gameplay for Ghosts and Busters is mostly consistent. I think if you're a casual DBD enjoyer, you'll very much enjoy the atmosphere and gameplay Ghostbusters provides. But what about the aesthetics? Visuals are often the first thing to grip an audience. You can tell a lot about a game from an art style. Between these two games we can see a stark difference. Dead by Daylight has a realistic style. You could suggest stylized in some ways, but I feel it mostly comes across as lower fidelity. Not necessarily a bad thing though. It makes the game very clear and easy to focus on important elements like lockers, vaults, pallets and generators. The reason realistic works well for DBD is it allows iconic horror figures to blend together in a world where they can fit naturally. The Demogorgon, for example, doesn't look out of place standing next to Ghostface, Nemesis or the Trapper. Dead by Daylight also features darker, muted tones, which also attracts a more mature audience. The game being 18+, this makes sense. This allows for the gruesome blood and gore elements of the game to also blend in effectively. On top of this, specific colours can be used to elicit different emotional responses. Often, darker tones are more connected to more negative emotions. For example, it has been suggested dark green imbues feelings of fear, whereas light green relates to acceptance. But DBD features lower detailed environments to support the simple core loop, a realistic style and darker colour palette which feels directed towards a more mature audience, allowing blood and gore to be utilised. Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed takes a different approach. This game is far more stylised with exaggerated details on characters and environments. You could compare the style to Overwatch. It feels much more friendly and much more vibrant colour palettes are used. The original Ghostbusters 1984 film is rated PG, and I remember loving it when I was younger. It makes sense for the game to be marketed in a way that is enjoyable for a younger audience as well as an older one. Its cartoonish visuals go further. Obviously, rather than blood and gore, it utilises the idea of slime.
He slimed me.
That's great! Actual physical contact!
Something the films do as well. A younger audience is catered for, but also those with a love of the films get a nostalgia kick from it too. There is no visualised violence, which perhaps leans further into the casual element I mentioned in the previous section. The environments are very detailed as well. Lots of small objects and items. This helps with making the world feel real. Although sometimes this can make it confusing for the ghost player, as not all objects can be possessed, but it does help make the world feel a lot more populated as opposed to DBD. There is some support from the UI to aid with this issue, but we'll talk about that more later. Generally though, Ghostbusters has a much more friendly visual style, making it more palatable to a younger audience than DBD. It leans more into a more casual aesthetic and away from the more serious horror vibes, not taking itself too seriously. I'm a big fan of this personally. As someone who loves Dead by Daylight, it's nice to play a game that feels similar in playstyle but visually different. But if you like the more realistic and darker tones of Dead by Daylight, Ghostbusters is quite a stark difference and is more similar to Video Horror Society than DBD. So we mentioned the visuals of the environments, but let's discuss the actual level design and world building of the games. So in terms of level design, there are two sides: the layout and how it supports the gameplay itself, and then the world building, how the environment helps reinforce the game's narrative. As mentioned before, Dead by Daylight focuses a great deal on loops. Within its randomly generated environments are tiles which are designed to be utilised by survivors to elongate their chases with killers, buying time for others to work on the objective generators. There is also static elements which can be guaranteed on certain maps, like each map tends to feature a main building and a killer shack. There are some exceptions to this rule, such as Haddonfield which has no killer shack, but my point is each map features static elements as well. This provides players with some certainty in a very RNG heavy game, and with that, they can still make some informed decisions during a chase. The map design in DBD fully supports the gameplay, keeping each match unique, and chaotic with plenty of back and forth between the two sides. Ghostbusters similarly has a chase-like mechanic, where the busters try to ensnare the ghost into a situation where it's difficult for it to escape their traps. Every map thus far features 2 floors. This gives the ghost an ability to escape to higher ground, but also busters are able to drop down and catch ghosts out with a pincer-like manoeuvre. The maps also feature plenty of enclosed spaces and more open areas, again allowing for different locations on any given map to create interesting battles between both sides, trying to trap or escape. Environments are more static than DBD though, and are unchanging. The only element which is randomised are the Ghost Rift spawn locations. There are also portals that ghosts can use to jump through floors and walls. This is an element that is currently static as well, but might be nice to see it more randomised in the future. But generally I would say both Ghostbusters and DBD have great level design to support and facilitate the gameplay itself. Lore/world building is the concept of fleshing out a setting beyond just the initial concept. It's about building a sense of place that transcends the original concept or plot. Dead by Daylight features a lot of text-based lore in the archives, as well as character descriptions to help support the narratives. It has a very explicit style which is stated clearly and in detail, leaving no room for confusion or doubt. What's great though is that this detail bleeds over into the level realms. Great examples of this could be Autohaven, featuring severed limbs of the Wraith's former victims, or the artist's Eyrie of Crow's realm, where you can see her paintings, etc. The reason this is important is staging player space with environmental properties that can be interpreted as a meaningful whole, furthering the narrative of the game. The environments support the world and narrative, connecting everything together, which adds to a sense of player immersion. Ghostbusters has a slightly different approach though. It does feature some text-based collectibles which give some backstories for the levels, such as the occult exhibit in the museum, but the ghosts don't have the same degree of lore or backstories. And your characters are your own, so feature no backstory outside of a small storyline that occurs in the firehouse. Rather than developing a detailed lore in that way, the levels themselves feature an emergent style narrative. This is a narrative in the process of coming into being or becoming prominent. As the ghosts haunt an environment, increasing amounts of slime encloses the hallways and papers begin to blow around as grime and dirt festers fixtures in every corner. It's superbly done and really helps develop the atmosphere. This is in unison with all the small detailed possessable objects which fit into the level and are positioned in a way that feels right. It really helps the world feel logical and real. Jan Willem Nejan, in a fantastic talk about juice in video games, a topic we discussed in more detail in a previous video, they discussed the concept of permanence and described it as a sense of previous combat. But essentially it's the idea that previous activity in the level remains. This is seen a lot in games like Hotline Miami, where on your way back to the exit of a level, you must walk back through the chaos and destruction you enacted. Similarly, in Ghostbusters, you can see the haunted objects having moved and scattered as areas become increasingly haunted in general. It feels good and shows the player the impact they've had. Broken windows and damaged paintings, etc. all remain. Permanence. This all adds to creating an idea of an emergent narrative. So generally, although accomplished in different manners, both Dead by Daylight and Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed have great level design for supporting their gameplay loops, as well as building their world and in-game narratives. But level design is one thing. How do they each support their players with their respective user interfaces? I went into a lot of detail regarding UI specifically in the last comparison, so I'll try to keep this concise, but the reason UI is so important is because good design when it's done well becomes invisible. It's only when it's done poorly that we notice it. Poor UI can often hurt overall user experience. As I've mentioned in the past, informational architecture can be an important tool when developing your interfaces. With regards to this topic, we'll pay special attention to choice and disclosure. Dead by Daylight does a great job of having minimal choices on its menus. A greater number of options increases cognitive load and makes it more difficult for people to make decisions. Consider Netflix or any other streaming service. Too many options make it sometimes difficult to choose something. The same applies to video game UI. Too many options can cause choice overload. Ghostbusters menus are further simplified though. You have your settings, friend list, and then getting straight into the game. This appeals heavily to the idea of disclosure. We only want to show enough information to help people figure out what they'll find next. Both games have minimal options, but it's very quick and clear to get to where you want to go. Rather than a standard menu, Ghostbusters relies heavily on an in-game hub world, which you and your friends can wait together and search for matches. Instead of clicking through menus, you can walk to a particular station, which does take some getting used to, but it does feel engaging and adds to the casual atmosphere that the game keeps showing. So both have easy to navigate menus, but what about their in-game heads-up displays? If we utilise the rule of thirds, this suggests that the cross sections are where an audience's attention is mostly focused, so it's important to keep these visually stimulating. Most games will keep this central zone clear for the core gameplay, and it is the outer sections which are utilised for important UI information. Further to this, we can apply the concept of Z patterns. This is the idea that our eyes track information in a particular visual order. With this idea, the most important information might be placed in position 1 for example. This can vary though depending on the gameplay. For example, DBD's HUD information is lower down, still utilising the Z pattern but lower. This is because the gameplay itself requires the upper section to be clear, for the players to track each other, in a cat and mouse style of gameplay. The reason this is important in DBD is because a lot of the action is seen in the distance in a large open map. As a player, you can try to keep an eye out for killers or survivors working on generators from a greater distance. Outside of this, the HUD is populated with the most important information, like remaining generators, hook counts, and current items/perks. Some button prompts remind the player of how to navigate the gameplay, such as at lockers, you press the spacebar. Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed differs from this a little. Similarly, it keeps the main area clear of most UI so the player can follow the gameplay and action. However, the UI is spread more traditionally into the corners of the screen. This is likely again environmental. The maps are much more enclosed, meaning they don't have to look so far into the distance for what's happening. Most of the action takes place right on the player's doorstep as they try to hunt the ghost, haunt the building, or evade capture. Much like Dead by Daylight, important UI like skill checks are very central and immediately draw the player's focus. Ghostbusters also utilises a ping system which we'll discuss in more detail in the next section, but this UI further supports the Buster gameplay. We also mentioned earlier the difficulty of ghosts discerning which objects they could possess. To help with this, they are shown a small green highlight to show which objects can be possessed. Controller inputs are also prompted, often making the game even easier to navigate and play. These prompts fade when you cannot act on them, making it even clearer to the player. Across the top is a continual reminder of the haunt progress, the amount of remaining rifts is clear, and civilians show their terror above their heads, giving all players important information throughout gameplay. Overall, both are incredibly easy to understand at a basic level, though Dead by Daylight has more to learn through practice, such as how individual perks work, of which there are 213 as it stands. I would argue if you like playing solo queue survivor in Dead by Daylight, Buster would provide you with more UI tools like a ping system to support solo Buster gameplay as well. I think both do an excellent job of keeping the game simple to understand and give UI support when needed. You could maybe suggest Ghostbusters is perhaps more friendly to newer players, but generally both do a great job. Now let's move on to discuss player communication and matchmaking. It's worth noting both games feature crossplay, which hugely helps with having people to play with, but let's discuss how they differ a little bit more. Dead by Daylight features two primary roles. This splits matchmaking into either playing as a survivor or the killer. With survivor you can play with up to 3 friends, or you can solo queue. You have an overall survivor matchmaking rating, or MMR, which will attempt to match you and your teammates with an appropriately skilled killer to ensure some degree of fairness. Each killer plays alone, and each killer also features an MMR value for each character. Again, when you search for a match, it will attempt to match you with an appropriately skilled set of survivors. DBD recently introduced matchmaking incentives to further support finding matches. As it stands, killers sometimes featuring some rather long queue times, which can be a bit of an issue as the pool of survivors must be lower during certain times of the day. Currently, if a player disconnects from the survivor side, you often now just find yourself at a disadvantage. If the killer disconnects, the game immediately ends. This can be quite frustrating as it feels unfair for those left in the match when someone chooses to leave, but that's a topic for another video. In terms of communication between players, outside of using a Discord call, there isn't much. You can choose to emote as a survivor, pointing or waving. You can also teabag, and killers can hit survivors on hook. Basically, the majority of communication between players is used to either BM or meme. It doesn't really provide anything to the actual gameplay. Ghostbusters also features two primary roles, the Ghost and the Buster team. Unlike DBD, you can search for matches as either Ghost, Buster, or with no preference. You can search for games with your friends, and any one of you can choose to play as the Ghost. If you were to do this in Dead by Daylight, you would need to set up a custom lobby, whereas in Ghostbusters you can play as normal and still gain experience and complete challenges with your friends. This again adds to that casual feeling I keep referring to. Ghostbusters appears to feature no MMR, so new players and those more experienced can be matched up together. But again, the casual feel of the game reduces how frustrating this can feel. No matter how the game goes, win or lose, the game mostly does a great job of making you feel like you've progressed in some way. Ghostbusters also gives players a ping system for the Buster players to direct each other and a built-in mic system for players and Ghosts to speak to each other. I'm never a fan of these, so I immediately muted this feature, but the ping system and all the UI elements give enough information for players to work together and coordinate in some way. Another difference between the game is Ghostbusters has integrated AI players, which will replace those who disconnect, which at least allows the game to continue in some form. Unfortunately though, the AI can be quite simplistic, and as a Ghost player I've often found myself trapped in AI heavy lobbies. Matchmaking can be quite strange as well, as if you request to play as a Ghost, you will always be put into a Buster game first to fill in for a disconnected player, only to find that after this you can be trapped into an AI matchup, having to return to the menu and search again, only to be sent to fill in for another Buster game. It can be quite annoying. Also, sometimes when playing with friends, even though they are set to play Buster, they can find themselves as the Ghost, which can be quite frustrating at times as well. So although you'll always be able to find a match, matchmaking could do with some attention in some areas. So with that in mind, let's discuss if a DBD player might enjoy Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. Dead by Daylight is one of my favourite games. The way it brings together the horror community and iconic horror legends is amazing. The simple gameplay loop together with its well-designed UI make for an engaging, exciting game to both play and watch. Although increasingly taken maybe too seriously by the player base, the introduction of MMR, continual rebalancing of the game, and reveal of events such as the Community Cup could all suggest the game is moving in a more competitive direction. Many players can be seen becoming increasingly upset with this, and this is where I think Ghostbusters comes in. If Video Horror Society is the competitive alternative to Dead by Daylight, then Ghostbusters is maybe the casual one. It has enough similarities that the players of DBD will be able to quickly understand and grasp the gameplay itself. A definite plus is that solo Busters often have a greater ability to work together than solo survivors in DBD. The Ghostbusters gameplay is more chaotic and frantic at times, but also there feels like there is a reduced pressure to focus on hitting the win states. You can still lose and feel rewarded by the game. Dead by Daylight can have similar feelings, but again, often players increasingly feel more entitled and focused on victory. Ghostbusters is exhilarating to play, and its elements of design work really well together to make an extremely fun and well-paced experience. With their similarities, it is strange to not have seen the Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed better marketed towards the DBD player base, as it seems like a natural fit. I will also say the business model is slightly concerning. It currently costs just under $40, quite expensive. They do plan on releasing more content for free, but to me, a cheaper price of paid DLC would work better. I still don't quite understand why no asymmetrical horror games follow the same successful business model of Behaviour's Dead by Daylight, which only costs $20. They make their money with selling cosmetics and adding new characters through DLC packs. I think Ghostbusters is worth it, but I worry that the higher price may not draw in the casual players, which feels like of its target audience. The higher price might also suggest it's not going to be getting continual updates and support through DLC. If there isn't more money coming into the game, development will cease. I really hope the developers have a strong action plan for Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. I think the game is great, but with some matchmaking hiccups already showing when I want to play as Ghost, I can't help but worry, especially given the track record of others in the genre. But if you love the casual side of Dead by Daylight, or just love the idea of hunting ghosts with your friends or sliming everything around you, I think you will very much enjoy Ghostbusters Spirits Unleashed. But let me know what you think. Have you played the new Ghostbusters game at all? How do you feel about it? How do you feel it compares to Dead by Daylight? Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video and want to see more videos like this, consider liking and subscribing. Have an amazing rest of your day and happy busting.